Hello and welcome to the Ascendant Art Podcast, where we are on a search for art ascending above the mainstream. I am Mike, your host, here with Joey, Andrew, and Vinny as we talk about the Ascendant and Descendant art today. First up on the agenda, because we were laughing about this up until we decided to hit the record button, was the new Eternals movie that has come out. Vinny has given us some interesting background. So, hey, do you want to explain a little bit more about what's behind the movie, and then we can get into some of these awesome reviews?
Oh yeah, I'd love to, being the comic book go-to here. So Eternals, which is Marvel's next big thing, is coming out in a few weeks from when we're recording this podcast. The basic background on the Eternals is they are cosmic-y characters, cosmic level kind of superhero characters. They were originally created by Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby, who is famous for having drawn and helped unofficially co-created the entire Marvel universe, but doesn't get as an official paper credit because it was work for hire. He had left Marvel in disputes over pay and royalties and a lot of other things, and he went to DC Comics and created the New Gods. These are characters a lot of people are familiar with, not necessarily as New Gods, but as the Dark Side, who's the villain in the Zack Snyder Justice League cut, or Orion, Allfather, Big Berta. Anyway, so those he created those characters at DC. It's got into disputes over there, and then went back to Marvel in the late '60s, '70s era, and created the Eternals, which were basically New Gods type characters for Marvel Comics, and that's why they had a very splashy Jack Kirby look. But that's the background on these characters. They never really took off outside of being a very deep comic book cut. They were like part of Marvel lore. The biggest thing that they had going for them in terms of their lore is that Thanos is an Eternal. He is a corrupted Eternal. He's basically got deviant genealogy in there with him too, which is why he doesn't look attractive and stunning like all the other people they cast are. So that's the real main thing for comic book people that you took away from the Eternals is just Thanos as a character. He's the only really lasting deep impression in Marvel Comics. So a few years back, at the height of the DC versus Marvel movie stuff, DC announced Ava DuVernay, who was a very hot commodity director who had just done a movie for Marvel Disney, The Wrinkle in Time, had been signed to do a New Gods movie for DC film. And within a few weeks of that announcement, Kevin Feige comes out and announces Eternals was being made at Marvel. And it was an example of one of the things Kevin Feige has done several times where DC makes an announcement and then he takes it and undercuts it immediately with Marvel content designed to get out earlier than theirs and basically take the thunder away from the DC people. He did it previously when DC had announced Batman v Superman. Within a few weeks of that, he announced Captain America Civil War, which was going to be Captain America versus Iron Man. And this time he did Eternals, which was another Kirby property that had very similar themes to the New Gods, and he put it into production. And New Gods is now a canceled movie. It's not going to be made. Ava DuVernay was let go, and the movie was shelved. And now Marvel is actually releasing Eternals as directed by Chloe Zhao, which is a big problem for them now because even though she won an Oscar last year for Nomadland or whatever it was called, she has made some comments critical of her home country of China. And China is now not giving it a release date when this movie was, again, designed to be demographically and internationally themed so they could make maximum international money in addition to their normal Marvel printing press in the US. The issue now is it's looked very lackluster in the trailers. It's been kind of boring, but the review embargo is broken and it is not getting very positive reviews as Marvel movies go. Right now, it stands at a I believe, let me go. I'm looking at Rotten Tomatoes right now as of October 26th at 9:39 p.m. and it's sitting at a 70% fresh. And that sounds great, except when you realize that means it's basically the second worst Marvel movie rating wise ever.
And on top of
Only
that,
Ouch.
I think it might be behind only maybe Incredible Hulk or Thor Dark World, which are well known, amazing works of cinematic achievement for Marvel.
and I was going to say, especially because the fresh rating is also the pros who tend to favor a lot of this stuff by default anyway. So if it's not doing well in the fresh rating, it's definitely not going to make it for right, the general audience.
Oh no, yeah, there's no audience score just yet at all, and it's for a Marvel movie to rate this low, and it's gone down. When it first had reviews pop up yesterday, it was at 73, 72, 73%. So it's going down with each subsequent batch of reviews being loaded. And what that also means is that it's likely to maybe become the worst reviewed Marvel movie by the time it's out. Um, and this was a movie they were touting in background as being like the most cinematically impressive Marvel movie ever made, that it was an Oscar contender for Best Picture, that Chloe Zhao is this amazing visionary director and she could win back-to-back Oscars for Best Director with a superhero movie. And that doesn't look like it's anywhere near happening now based on these reviews coming out. It is definitely not strong enough to contend on that level. And I'm gonna say I think that it may not open as much as Shang-Chi, and it definitely, when Spider-Man No Way Home comes out, I think that's gonna blow the doors off what Marvel's been making on Shang-Chi and Eternals prior to it. So it's interesting, but the real thing I think is worth noting, and this is something for all the listeners that they may want to pay attention to, is that Rotten Tomatoes is kind of a biased system. The critics who are approved and submit their reviews get to decide whether it should be a good review or a bad review, a fresh tomato or a rotten tomato. I think sometimes Rotten Tomatoes can also, if the critic doesn't decide, can based on the review kind of decide if it's a good one or a bad one. And I found a few examples where it looks like basically they are rating it as a positive review.
Yep.
But it is definitely not in actuality, when you read like the blurb on there, a positive review. So
yeah, we got to hear a couple of these, dude.
all right, so let's find some of these that I thought was okay. This is a positive review, according to Rotten Tomatoes. A mishmash of well-meaning yet jarringly verbose and bafflingly incoherent nonsense, which is only just about saved by some half-decent performances. Certified fresh tomato review. I don't know if I would ever say something that is a verbose and bafflingly incoherent nonsense would be considered a positive.
Yeah, number one, not a positive review, and second of all, it's like, yes, dude, we know you majored in English in college.
Yeah, that's a lot of everything that you see these days with writing.
I know, but like, it's not good writing for a general audience.
It's not good writing for anybody. It's pretentious and try hard.
Exactly.
So let me find. I think there's. Oh, this is from Looper, certified fresh review, by the way. So it's got the nice fresh tomato logo next to it. So, and that's what all people like. If you're scrolling real quick, you'll just see a big fresh tomato. So you'll think, okay, it's a good review. But here's what the little blurb of the review is. Feels a bit like homework. If you don't want the rest of the class to move on without you, it's mandatory. But in the end, you'll just be glad to turn it in and move along to the next thing. That's a good review. And it's like, I mean,
Dude,
that's from
like,
Looper.
That totally makes me want to spend like, I don't even know what tickets are now, like 10, $15.
I know. I mean, in my area, it's a little cheaper, around like $10, but it's still like, come on.
Like you're telling me like I want to spend $10 and 2 hours of my time on homework.
That's only going to cover like the ticket. You're going to want to get some condiments, some concessions, if you will. Your popcorn, your soda. Like,
Yeah.
a trip to the movie theater for just one person is usually $30 at least.
Let's see. Who's another one we can get to? Because I think I want to find, because like right now I'm looking at just the positive ones, but I mean there's a lot of actually bad rated ones. Okay, Grace Randolph, right? YouTuber extraordinaire. This is her. She's certified at fresh. There are enough good elements here to warrant a fresh tomato, but wow, did Chloe Zhao not understand the MCU assignment? I mean, if you're saying that the director didn't
Did she
understand,
certify it fresh, or did like the company
no,
certify it
no, no. I,
fresh?
I I actually watched her review on YouTube just to make sure. She said this is where I get the idea that the reviewers get to choose whether it's considered a fresh or bad review. And she said she chose to make it fresh because of some elements, but then she proceeded to write why it's not really a good Marvel movie, like in her whole review. And that's what she wrote up. It's like she's basically criticizing how the director didn't know how to make a good Marvel movie, and that's what it is. This is a Marvel movie. Like,
That should be like step one. Make sure that people realize it's a Marvel movie.
so now
Yeah.
that those were the positive ones that are really faulted, but the movie is not getting a lot of great reviews on top of that from like the top critics. Now these are people that are usually within the I don't know how to say this nicely, the Disney pocket, where that because of pay to play and really wanting to maintain access, the ones from these very big institutional places will give it positive reviews under normal basis, like Screen Crush, right? Screen Crush needs Disney's approval for a lot of the things that make Chloe Zhao's indie movies special didn't translate to massive blockbuster filmmaking. At least that was, what that, what's funny is it's very similar to the blurbs we've read where it said it was a good review, and that one's a not good. So this is a critic that if he's choosing that is at least being honest about his review. But it is interesting when you think about how Rotten Tomatoes is being used to prop up like whether people decide to go see a movie or not. And so there's a really big element where some of these critics who are what they're doing is they're being honest in what they write, maybe, so they can go back and say, look at what I wrote. I wrote all these things about it later, so they can say I'm being, intellectually honest. But then they're playing the game where they choose the fresh tomato, so it counts as a good review, so that in the end, when audiences are just looking at that aggregate number to decide is it a movie that I should go see or not, they're still doing their service to big Disney for doing that. So that's the point I think is something people hopefully will start waking up to, that Rotten Tomatoes is a weighted system for the studios.
We kind of already knew that, though. Well,
Yep.
most people did, I think.
I was gonna say, meanwhile, the one point made kind of earlier that I'm still just kind of latched onto is when you talked about DC's New Gods. That it's funny, like before I got into what I do now, I studied chemical engineering, and it almost sounds like something I hear over in those industries in which multiple companies will all announce they're going to build like a new plant for some product like all at the same time. And it got to the point of like some of these companies would actually like hire pilots to do like spy plane work to like check out the other guy's build site to see if he was actually doing it, because the goal sometimes was not to build the plant, it was to get the other guy to chicken out and not build. And it sounds like at the very least, if the movie accomplished nothing else, it sounds like they were able to do that for the rival film.
Any word on what the rival film might have been?
Then for New Gods,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it was going to be written by Ava DuVernay and Tom King. Tom King's the comic book writer who had his most famous work right now was pissing off most of DC fans by not letting Catwoman get married to Batman when he had publicized it for like 50 issues, and then making Batman an introspective, like broken by the Catwoman leaving him at the altar character. So he was, in fact, he was supposed to have a 100 issue run where he was going to tell this whole story. And by like issue 70, he had been pissing off fans so much, DC just like canceled him off the book and moved him on to other stuff. It's a pretty well-known thing. And where it made a lot of news that he was kicked off outside of his own choice. they gave him like a little 6-issue miniseries like called Cat and Bat to try to finish his storyline out that they, are just letting him do right now. But it's a pretty, emasculating thing to be like kicked off your of Batman, because that's the flagship title. You want to be the Batman writer. He's also, he he's- Richard Meyer runs a diversity in comics channel. I think summed it up a little good when he's like said that Tom King is kind of working through his own personal issues in every book he writes, and it's sad he's not writing the characters as they are. He's writing the characters as they are dealing with the issues he wants to work out. And and like he did a whole mini series about like heroes in crisis, where they're going to like some random special place where they can talk to robot psychologists and go over their issues. But it's also not just heroes, it's also villains.
A special place.
Yeah,
Special place.
it's hard to describe unless you wanted to go through the whole like story arc. But there's basically, and of
Batman,
course,
you're
Batman
good enough.
fun.
You're smart enough, and doggone it, people like you.
Well, it was supposed, it was set up by Bruce Wayne, of course, with his own money, and he promised the heroes that when they went and had their little psychology sessions, that it would delete the recordings. And of course, he's Batman, so he's not. So he's like listening in on all the heroes and villains. Like, how much sense did it make for like Harley Quinn to be going through to like work her issues out? She's crazy, and so this is also
I
where
thought
they
she was a
killed
psychologist already.
Harleen Quinzel, yep, PhD. It's just it was a terrible book. It was also bad for the fact that they had Harley Quinn like one-shotting Superman in a fight, and I hate to break it to you, she's not a superhero. She's like a crazy woman. She shouldn't be able to like take on Superman in any kind of fight. But they were, Harley Quinn is, stunning and brave and #1 seller at in character right now that DC was pushing at the time. And they killed Wally West, and that pissed people off too, because Wally West is a fan favorite, and DC Comics had chosen not to bring him back for years after the New 52. And then when they did sort of bring back Wally West, it was a race bent character, and that wasn't what fans had kind of wanted. And when they brought back the original Wally West, they kill him off. It's almost like, again, the people running comic books are trying to find ways to piss off the longtime fans and make them leave and not want to buy books. And they're really, really good at it.
It's almost like they just want the market to be only people just.
It's not just comic books, huh? I mean, they've
Yeah.
infiltrated every imaginable part of culture, every part of the government, every part of the academy. It's gotten ridiculous at this point.
Exactly. And the result is that's why now we have to like go and create some new art and new culture. And speaking of that, why don't you go on ahead, because you're talking about a couple of games that have come out recently. So let's hear about those.
Sure. Interestingly, they're kind of like my comic. They're both medieval horror. So, and they're both early access. One of them is the sequel to Darkest Dungeon, and that was a major indie hit. I don't know what it is, 3 years ago, maybe even 4 years ago. But this little studio called Red Hook, they came out of nowhere and they published this game, which is essentially a gothic horror, a medieval gothic horror. It's kind of like a Dungeons and Dragons old school
It's got one of
dungeon
the best
crawler.
narrators in any video game.
It's got one of the most amazing live narrators of any video game, easily. That's kind of calling the blow for blow the whole time you're going through the dungeons, fighting monsters, and etc. It has some major flaws from a game mechanic perspective. And today, the second version came out on early access. I haven't even played it yet, so we'll save that for some kind of future episode. But and I'll get more in depth about the gameplay at that point. But I don't want to talk about that one tonight because it only just came out tonight.
Okay.
The other one is a brand new title. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
The other one is a brand new title from a new studio. I'm going to Google it right here just to make sure. Playside is the developer. And I guess I thought that they were a new studio. Maybe they're not. Maybe they've got other titles out there. But this is a indie game in early access. It came out maybe about a year ago. It's a classic real-time strategy. I mean, it feels like it could really be just a mod of Command and Conquer or Warcraft 2 or something like that. Tech-wise, there's nothing new here. It's an old real-time strategy, the classic real-time strategy.
I was gonna say, man, I loved growing up with Command and Conquer, all the way
Yeah.
back to the originals.
For sure. I was a big real-time strategy fan my whole life too, especially the Warcraft and StarCraft series. But Command and Conquer was great also.
Oh,
So-
Command and Conquer was so good. What was the one? Was it which sequel was it? Was it Red Tiberian Sun or where
Okay,
it
yeah,
was like?
so-
Red alert.
Yeah. So you had the Tiberian series. That was Tiberian Dawn, then Tiberian Sun, Twilight, and then there's like one other.
And Red Alert was the one where Einstein went back in time and killed Hitler, right?
Yes. So that was their
And-
other timeline. Yes.
And then you had to fight, and then it was a World War II level
The
Russia
Soviets.
that never took over fighting and taking over. That one was pretty fun because it had all the comrade when you were being the Russians.
Yeah, it had all the accents, and then of course, for some reason, the Russians had way better tanks too, which I don't know how that could ever translate.
Well, spoiler alert. I mean, for a frickin' 30-year-old game. Spoiler alert. The reason the Russians had better tanks was revealed at the end. It was because that dude who was leading the Brotherhood of Nod from the original Command and Conquer
yes,
also
Kane.
jumped back in time and was pulling the strings of the Soviets.
There
So
we
he
go.
gave them all that tech.
He gave them
That's
all,
why.
all the alien technology from Tiberian Dawn.
Yeah.
Well, I guess yeah, if you could cheat your way out of like a communist economy, then if you just take your way out of it.
Are those available on Steam? I mean, I feel like they need to be, right?
Which ones?
And the Red Alert and Command and Conquer series. Of course, it's
Well-
EA, and I don't really want to give EA money.
EA got their filthy mitts on Westwood Studios IP and ruined everything.
Yes, indeed, you could tell after Tiberian.
Didn't they make a really shitty Command and Conquer
Yes.
mobile game a few years back that was
Oh,
just terrible?
I don't know
Yeah.
about a mobile game. I just know that they ever since they got their hands on Command and Conquer, everything's been shitty, and I'm a little bitter.
Oh yeah, because that's also they made that like absolute unbalanced dog breakfast called Command and Conquer Generals.
Yep.
Yeah, but
Oh, I'm
man.
finding out Command and Conquer Rivals, a real-time free-to-play mobile game released on Android and iOS in December 2018.
Yeah, I was gonna look it up, but maybe it's better if somebody else look it up and I continue with
Yeah.
the other game, Age of Darkness.
Yeah,
Yeah,
let's
let's
get
get
to
back
one
to
that
Age of
isn't EA.
Darkness.
So let's support some indie guys. Let's do that.
Although I will tell you one quick thing before we jump off of this. I do know Red Alert. There is an open source version of it, so people like completely reproduce the game in that format. So we'll have to find that project page because I've played that one before and that's a lot more fun. But anyway, yes,
Yeah, so-
let's get back to it.
No problem. This one is technologically, artistically, it's not really an evolution. It's not the next level. It's not something from the future. It could easily be a mod of one of our favorite RTSs from the old days. There are technological advances. For example, the amount of enemies that you face is just too large to even count. There could be like thousands of enemy units. I don't know anything about unit bottlenecks on the player side because the game is brutally difficult. It's one of those games like Darkest Dungeon where you could just play over and over. And I'm sure at this point that the reason I've invested hundreds of hours into Darkest Dungeon is because it's so brutally difficult. You keep thinking, I'm going to do better next time. And sometimes you never do for weeks at a time. The game is brutally difficult. It really doesn't take you by the hand. You are in control of a medieval keep of some sort. You can build everything up to and including individual wall segments. It's very much thematically like Game of Thrones Season 7, the war with the White Walkers. It's very, very dark. There's not really a lot of humor. Even the soundtrack is extremely heavy and depressing. So it's a very somber game and it's extremely unforgiving, very difficult. And you're basically fortifying some kind of keep that you scrape out of the wilderness, and you have the sense that the rest of the world is gone, and you have to slowly keep expanding and acquiring fields for crops, forest for timber, stone and silver quarries, and that kind of thing. And the further that you explore, the more desolate everything is, and there's just endless, endless armies of undead just kind of wandering aimlessly in the forest and the wilderness. And every few days, there's some kind of event where you have a massive onslaught of undead, and it seems to increase exponentially. Right now, it's early access, it's not even a month out. There's only a single hero unit released, and there's not that many choices for your basic units either. And even with that, even keeping that in mind that the game is extremely partial, it's very, very engaging, and I've played probably 100 hours already, just starting over and over again because it's so hard. And even with only a fraction of the planned features available, the game is already very addictive and engaging.
And what you're also telling me too is that when the mainstream game journalists like just touch this thing, you're going to hear all of these cries for like, we have to have an easy mode.
Yes,
yeah.
you definitely are. Definitely for this game.
Like they just want to like, we'll say like hit the L key and the enemies just disappear.
I will say, based
Press
on
a
what
button
I'm
to take the
hearing,
L.
based on what I'm hearing here, you're a bit of a masochist when it comes to gaming, huh?
Yeah, maybe sometimes.
Like Darkest Dungeon, this game, which sounds equally horrifying. You play Dark Souls?
No, I have. The other thing that I play is League of Legends solo with 4 random players on every team, so that's
Ah,
gotta be harder than any other game in the world if you're playing alone with 4 random people.
this is true.
But I was gonna say though, I mean, it's really like you're trying to like open up and solve a very complex puzzle, is what it sounds like. And,
Yeah, that's
when you
definitely it.
figure- When you figure out the right combination of like the game's math and its mechanics, so that you can make it work. I mean, yeah, like that is something very satisfying. You've like almost like built or discovered something in doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And wasn't that always the best part about actually getting through a game was the sense of accomplishment you got from actually like geez, like I mean, can you imagine like I think we talked about Ghosts and Goblins, right? Remember when you were a kid and played that and you had your basically one life and as
Never got the sense of accomplishment from that game.
no,
Okay.
I never did, but I know somebody who actually I talked with somebody who finished it, and I was like, oh my, this is the what it meant. Like I was like, you finished Ghosts and Goblins, like
No, they lied to you.
they.
I don't believe it. Pictures or it didn't happen.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I never got through what it was like on the little map. It only scrolled about a quarter of the way at most for me.
I think I
But
made it to like the 3rd level once or twice.
but that was what it was. You really tried hard, and you would either get good, or you would beat it, or you would eventually move on. But you'd have respect for the people who did win, and when you have easy mode or other things, it's not like when you were playing like StarCraft and you put God mode on to have star cruisers just destroy everything. That was fun in a different way.
Well, imagine if some of these reviewers these days, right? Imagine if some of them went back and played the games we grew up with. Like Mega
Oh
Man
yeah,
2 took me months and months to finally beat because you
for
had to
real.
write down your passwords. Your password was
right.
also included your life count. So if you were low on lives, you were like, do I go back to my old password or do I use the new password? I've only got 1 life left and I don't know if I'm going to get more.
This is where I'll acknowledge
Yep.
that I had a subscription to Nintendo Power, just so.
And
So
it
did
would
I.
tell you which bits to set on that password.
It would tell you what the like if you want to have this person already beat and this many lives, this is your password and all this stuff. What's really fun to me now is going on YouTube sometimes and watching the speed runs of Mega Man where people can like beat the whole game in like 10 minutes. And I'm like, it took me hours and hours and saves and all this other stuff to beat this. And it's like these guys are just going right through.
Yeah.
I'm a big nostalgia gamer, so like I've gone back and played a lot of those. As it turns out, I was just a very uncoordinated child, and those games weren't nearly as hard as I remember. But
Except Battletoads.
well, what I've
Battletoads was
noticed,
hard.
what I've noticed is like, have you guys ever played Ultimate Chicken Horse?
I can't say that I have.
Can
How
you
about
tell me more about Ultimate Chicken Horse, Joey?
I'm intrigued.
Ultimate Chicken Horse is a multiplayer platforming game where you and the other players each pick an item at the beginning of each round and build the level. And the items can just be platforms that you need to jump across, because if you fall off the bottom of the map, you'll die, or there might be something down there that'll like kill you. There can be like buzz saws, there can be wrecking balls, and you build a level. And the goal is to be the only one who can complete said level as you're building it. That's how you win. But so it's like Ultimate Chicken Horse. You're playing chicken and you're playing horse. But
Do you have an
it's
idea of what the other people are putting into the level as you're doing it, or
yeah,
do you
because when the box opens up, you got to grab something quicker than anyone else, and you can see what they're putting down. But the thing of it is I played it with my daughters, and they got really mad at me because platforming isn't as big a thing for kids these days. So we almost have like the built-in instincts for some of those older games that they think are really hard now.
I was gonna say it's funny, like we're actually at the point of like, man, back in my day, video games were so much harder.
Uh,
I mean, but it's true. They were.
Yes,
Well, I mean,
yes, they
one
were.
thing I'll say is the fact that we all still play those games and that we can get our kids playing those games with us, like the older games, I think is a good and thing to talk to me, because you don't have to have AAA studio level like Unreal Engine run graphics to make a game that will appeal to people. Gameplay matters, and it doesn't have to be sophisticated graphics to make people want to play your game or to be happy to pay money to play your game. I think indie game creators are in the same kind of situation like indie comics creators. The main studios are so beholden to agenda that they're not really working on game development with gameplay and the player in mind. So there's a really big market to do stuff like that.
I think so, and I mean that's a good transition to the next topic. But I also wanted to touch on one point with that is as I am like collecting some stuff I've written early on about comics as I'm learning to write one. And one thing that stuck out to me pretty early is it's an essay I'm putting together called "Comics Are Comics," right? Like it is a medium, and there are certain things that you can do in that medium very effectively, and certain things that are not effective. And if you understand the medium and the craft, um right, with entry level with certain like entry level resources, you can still do a really good job. And in the case of gaming, when we joke about like, oh, like certain of these used to be so much harder, it is the case that, again, right, a platform game is a type of medium, an RPG is a type of medium. There are certain ways that, again, you can develop a storytelling craft that fits that medium very well, and you can dial in the right amount of challenge. And by doing that, you you don't have to create like the most graphically advanced game in order to make a very good game.
It's very true.
And I think this is, again, because it kind of goes back to the theme of like what we're on the search for here is it's, do people understand the medium and do they understand their fans? And now where that does transition is because last week we were looking at different Kickstarters. There was one that just finished, which was the Common America 4 Kickstarter. Since we had talked, because at that time it was, I want to say 2,900 backers, they ended up finishing with over 3,400 backers, spending an average of almost $50 each to do a $150,000 campaign. So some very impressive numbers there, along with, I can't tell you on Twitter how many times people were posting and retweeting the Final Countdown song today. But again, these are guys like they get the medium and they get their fan base, and the result was they became quite successful. So to remember, I think most all of us ended up back in that campaign.
I backed it.
I know I did.
I was gonna say, I know I also sponsored a meme contest for it. So I was gonna say one very lucky player for that meme contest ended up getting the a signed omnibus book for that. So
Was it me?
I'm sorry, Joey, it was another guy.
Damn it.
I was gonna say, did you see the announcement? I made badges and everything.
Of course.
Nah, I just assumed that my meme was so spectacular that it'd win. I mean, come on now.
I will get the Vermilla Masquerade badge for you. All right, so yeah, I mean, let's talk about it though. So I'm trying to think again. Just it's interesting that these guys are definitely among the rising stars in this kind of indie comics book movement. I know, of course, there's Comicsgate, although there are certain personalities associated with it, and they don't associate themselves with that necessarily. But it's interesting that again, guys who pay attention to craft, you're starting to see this exponential increase in success. And what's funny is another guy in the iconic world, Doug Ernst, actually found a couple of cases of mainstream artists that are starting to copy some of the storytelling elements out of his Soul Finder series. And so what that means is, right, culturally, they are now starting to impact the entire medium just by consistently doing good artwork.
And they will continue to have that impact so long as they continue to generate the profits.
Yep, which means producing stuff that the fans like, getting it delivered timely. Which, speaking of which, that's probably the fastest.
Yeah, but that's what it means for the indie creators. At this point, the big corporations don't produce stuff; they copy whatever's working. That's what they do.
They find a resource and extract it
until there's no resource left to extract.
Yes.
But this is where, being a little more into comic books, I can tell you it's not really happening that way, because they could sell so many issues and they know exactly what they could do to sell the issues in the books, and they're choosing not to. I mean, they're busy making Superman's son bisexual, gay, whatever, and not worried about, actually writing good books or doing good art. I mean, I would point out that Squirrel Girl got relaunched like 4 times with a level of art that made her look not human. And they're doing it on purpose because this is what they think is important to promote. Not so I would love to believe that they're just going to come in and see that these indie books that have attractive female characters and good art and good stories are selling and becoming more popular each iteration. But it's been long enough that they're not going to, and they don't care. I'm a little more, I guess black-pilled would be the term when it comes to the mainstream comic book industry ever correcting itself at this point. And I would be more inclined to say that other indie creators are likely to copy what Iconic Comics is doing. And that'll be great, because then we'll have more choices within that sphere. But I wouldn't really count on, even with the money motivation that's present, I think that we shouldn't really consider that as something that's actually going to happen.
Yeah. No, that also makes me think too. I could almost speculate that there's kind of an end game here, and not referencing the end game movie, that the end game may almost end up being that if they run these mainstream titles into the ground enough, they may get to the point that these companies are no longer sustainable. And the question is, could there ever be a point where they would be forced to sell off some of these titles in order to basically pay salaries, or kind of like with Sears, where like at this point, like that company just exists to like sell off its property over time until nothing's left.
I mean, I know Clownfish TV, a YouTube channel, and Ethan Van Sciver, Comic Art Pro Secrets, have both also done a lot of videos indicating that they think the long-term plan for AT&T, which owns Warner Brothers, and DC Comics underneath that, and Disney, which owns Marvel, and then Marvel Comics, are to basically get out of the publishing business within 3 to 5 years, just because it's not financially viable to bother with it. They've already got all the characters they need created. They've already got all 70 years of storylines to mine for movies that they'll basically get out of publishing directly, and then hire companies like IDW or Dark Horse or whoever, and just license out the Marvel Comics characters as a licensed character comic to be made by those guys.
That's interesting, but no, I think you're right. I could see that as being the case, because it's pretty clear that they're not working to maintain their comics medium at all.
On the plus side, that's why we've got great guys like Iconic and the indie creator comic community that's pushing about like getting back to really solid content, artwork, and such. I think if nothing else, if other creators are committing to the iconic model where they already have the book done and it will be published and shipped within weeks of the campaign ending, that's going to be the best thing that can happen to the comics industry. Because the one thing I think that holds back the indie comic crowdfunding community is just the amount of campaigns that are currently unfulfilled, holding back the people who have the money and would like to support them from purchasing more. Like right now, I have like 6 or 7 books that I've backed over the last 18 months that have not come in, when I know that my iconic comics purchase from just a few weeks back is going to be fulfilled within the next 2 weeks. And that's why I'm going to continue to just purchase from them when it comes up. And the other people I'll probably hold back and wait before I buy more from them.
And I was going to say, and this is also, I think, an important lesson for all of us as creators to learn too, is the reputation of, you're right, like from the time someone puts their money down to the time that they actually have the product in their hands, like that can be maybe not as important as the actual story, but it definitely is going to be one of the major factors along with creating like a good story and good artwork.
I agree with that.
I mean, we've got one guy on the team who's probably further into producing his own comic book than anybody. And what do you, any thoughts on that part? I know you've looked into crowdfunding a lot.
Yeah. And of course, we're referring to Andrew, who already has
Who are you talking to?
You.
Talking to you.
Who is furthest along in their comic? Come on,
I
man.
mean, who's actually
already
put
got
out
a
an
whole book? Yeah.
who's already put out an issue 0, which is amazing, and everybody should go out and sign up since they can go ahead and get that now. Why don't you do a little bit of shameless plugging before you enlighten us on some of the process?
Yes.
I think we could easily dedicate like an entire discussion to this, easily, and probably should, as it might be interesting to a lot of people. The kind of people that listen to this kind of podcast, a lot of them are creators themselves, right? So I've learned a lot of interesting stuff. I've joined a couple quite expensive groups, the kind of groups where they have very carefully dug through data, even from a data mining perspective, looking at like years of successful Kickstarters and comparing the numbers for all different things. Actually, comics is one of the most successful things on the entire platform for Kickstarters, if not the most successful out of any possible genre of product or whatever. So right away, Kickstarter is where you want to be. It's better than Indiegogo. That could be sad in certain ways, especially with their proclivity for jumping on the Silicon Valley bandwagon and banning people. It's not that Indiegogo is better. Apparently, there's somebody that we know that actually was involved in suing them because they were doing the same and they got smacked in a court of law, and that's why Indiegogo is less likely to unperson people these days than Indiegogo. I was planning on doing it right now, actually, my first Kickstarter, and I decided, even at the expense that I'm incurring for this, that it was too early, and actually what is now issue 1, which we haven't even started on, might actually become part of issue 0. I don't know how far I'm going to go with that. I could go up to 100 or 150 pages maybe with the free issue. So the very first thing that I'm doing, back to the main topic, how do we build an audience and get paying customers and the like? I know this is not necessarily easy for everybody, but if you're really a dedicated artist and you're in it long term, give them as much as you possibly can. Actually, that's number one thing, and that's how you grow your audience. Like, look at little Chad. Like, all of it's free, right? And he's got a huge audience now, and that's really the way to approach it. I mean, if you're in it for the long term, and you're confident that someday that you're going to succeed, then just give everything away. Just give everything that you possibly can away to build that initial audience. So I'm in the very early stages of that. I've had about 500 people download the comic maybe, and to me it wasn't really enough because it cost me about 10,000 to produce it. And I live in Canada and I work in Canada, so my dollars are already worth 24% less. So $10,000. There is really like 13,000 almost here, so it's even worse. But I am in it for the long term, and I think giving away the most that you possibly can is a good strategy for a lot of reasons. One of them is that anyone that you're asking somebody to do a Kickstarter support for you. You've already established a relationship with them. You've already given them a lot for free. Another thing is they already know exactly what they're buying into. Like the more that you can show them somehow or another, and it doesn't have to be a 100-page free graphic novel. It could be weekly newsletter content, for example. You get a bunch of people to sign up for your newsletter, and every week you drizzle out some little bit of world lore. So you're just giving them all the time, giving and giving and giving before you ask for anything back. And I want to stress that it doesn't have to be a huge and expensive product. It could be the result of drizzling out world lore on a weekly basis to your newsletter. But you want to have something to give them to get them to sign up for the newsletter in the first place. And I would say at the minimum, you should give them an ash can, like an 8-page example of your comic, for example.
Yep.
But if you can give more, please do. Absolutely. And once you have them as part of your captive audience, as a member of your personal newsletter is far superior to like a Twitter follow or a Facebook follow. Not that there's anything wrong with that, and those are important too, but for different reasons. But once you have them as part of your audience, just keep giving them free stuff all the time and make it about them. Don't always be asking them to sign up to things, to support you on the Kickstarter, to go check out your website. Make it as much as you can about them. And if you're giving them stuff, make it as easy as possible. Have it like one single link they have to click and they don't have to do anything to get it. And just give them everything you can about your world. And what you're doing is you're building fans and hopefully lifelong fans, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I've been talking for a long time. I don't want to monopolize, but that's my commentary.
No, I think that's very good. And of course, I know because full time I do web development. I know a couple things you mentioned out of there, of course, is the importance of understanding friction. So friction is, of course, the amount of pages you got to go to, links you click, forms you fill out, etc. And you're always trying to reduce friction so that you're reducing kind of like the mental effort or cost for people to get involved. The other thing that was kind of fun too was right, I mentioned earlier the Common America for Kickstarter. One of the ways I actually helped promote that as a fan myself was, like I said, I put a meme contest together. And one of the things I noticed there is trying to just come up with like, you're right, even just like simple, very memeable, shareable images. There is an art form even to that. And what's funny is you can engage the community by having the fans even like encourage each other with stuff like that as well. So you're right, like that can only happen though if you put all the base material out there for the fans to go and start doing that.
Yeah, you can give a lot. And meta stories, Wikipedia articles about places or characters in the world, alternate sketches, alternate world versions of the characters. There's so many things you can give for free at low expense once you're working on a regular basis with an artist. And it's the best thing you can do for the property.
Absolutely. And
I am working on becoming my own artist.
yes, we've seen some of those, and yeah, actually, tell us a little bit about the learning process and what you're going through, because you're right, like it has been fun to watch the sketches you've been sending out.
Well, and that's the thing. I've always been kind of a sketch artist. When I was a very young man, I used to, because I couldn't draw girls, I would record Sailor Moon on VHS and then pause it at various points so that I could try to teach myself to draw.
Oh, it was to
girls.
teach yourself to draw. That's why.
It
Okay,
was.
Teach
got it.
yourself to draw. Yeah, I used to pause those movies for the same reason.
The other things that happened are nobody's business and probably illegal at this point, but it was mostly to draw.
Which was the fair? Was it Sailor Mars or Sailor Jupiter?
It was Jupiter, obviously, because she's tall.
There you go.
But man, every time I talk about this joke comes up. But anyway, to continue. So I've had this drawing tablet for quite some time, and I mean, my kids got
Just to
really
point
good
it
at
out, there is a line in a famous song about how the girls from Sailor Moon make men think the wrong thing. So it's not
They
like
got the boom.
The wrong things. So accidental. How did you come up with that idea?
but yeah, so I've been learning how to use the tablet at this point, and it's been a lot of fun. And so I've been putting things together and kind of throwing them up on my Subscribe Star, and then later moving them onto the Twitter. And you shared one the other day, Michael. I appreciate that.
Yes, indeed, because that was a very well put together pick of was it that was your original character Tessa,
Yeah.
the elvish fighting wizard.
She's more fun to draw than Damocles, unfortunately. So you'll probably see more of her.
I was going to say, I mean, I've seen drawings of both, so I mean, I can understand why.
drawing little elf girls is going to be contagious apparently. So what kind of tablet or drawing system do you use? Are you just using the basic programs or
I picked up an XP pen. I think it's an Artist 22 Pro, which is you can get for like 400 or 500, and Krita, which is kind of a freeware thing that was developed by digital artists. Works pretty
Yes.
good.
I would say on the drawing side, it's definitely friendlier than GIMP if you're just looking for a free open source software.
and I think there's also, was it Wacom tablets? Is that what they're pronounced?
Wacom,
Wacom,
yeah, I don't know,
Wacom.
something like that.
Yeah, I know that they make some budget tablets, drawing tablets that are, have the program, they're a drawing tablet, so it's all built into it, that are pretty good.
Hmm.
I have a tablet too, quite a large one, which I don't know how to pronounce it, but I think it's called Huion, and I think it's Chinese, but it's also quite good, and it wasn't very expensive.
The only downside I see to digital art, and I think I've mentioned it on our creator Indiegogo campaign
Episode, yeah.
Kickstarter podcast episode, was that creating original art on paper gives you a market that is currently much more robust than like NFTs and the other stuff for selling. And if you do some original art pages or cover art on Bristol board or paper, you can sell that as part of your crowdfunding and sell it at a very high tier compared to your regular book and make some extra money for a single item.
Yeah, that's something I need to figure out which is extra challenging because I'm not the artist for my main property.
Yeah, because I've seen a lot of campaigns where when they'll throw like an original art tier up, where however many pages of the book, there's that many available, and sometimes it'll be as much as like $500 or $600, per page plus the book, and that's a quick way to get your average per person on a crowdfunding campaign up much higher. When you're normally going to be selling your book anywhere from 20 to like $40 maybe, depending on the size of it. Having a tier where you're selling things at $600-700 is obviously a higher per person return than selling something for 25.
Vinny, you throw some little Chad bobbleheads in there, and you will be doing just fine.
Yeah,
That's
I
right,
suppose,
dude.
or plushes. I've heard plushes are good. Mahler and the EFAP crew did pretty good with their plush run.
That's true. That's also true.
And I know one thing I'm experimenting with right now because right, we got some members of the Subscribe Star here too. Is I've been experimenting with stickers. And what's fun about those too is I know a couple people now have actually sent me pictures of like where they put them up. And there's one guy, what is it? The Weekly Pulls. He actually put one of my Danger Diamonds on his skateboard. So right now that thing's like out there in the wild.
Nice.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, so these are all like kind of creative ways. And the thing is, stickers are not that expensive. Now it's physical, so you do have to like, pay per item. But I mean you can get them down to like less than $1 each. So yeah, the idea of like just getting them out there into that space is another way that you can definitely get your idea out there.
Yeah.
But it sounds like bottom line is just coming up with creative ways to just make your art as available as possible for people is yeah, just that is the way to go as much as you can give.
Yeah, I really think that's a good lesson. I mean, I've noted, as my example is not like a Kickstarter, but it's it's like Jack was saying, Little Chad is out there, as a web comic, in effect, being released on my website through Twitter and the social media and things like that. And I'm now, as of this recording, around 18,500 followers. And I'm not as concerned, like you're saying, I have not translated that many social media followers into supporters on Patreon or Subscribestar or any of the platforms where I mean, I've done enough where I can kind of finance what I need to for what I'm running in terms of my operation, but it's not exactly paying the bills kind of money. But what it does play for later long term, like, is maybe when I do a Kickstarter for my physical book that I'll produce, since it's going to be something that's separate from the free content and gives a tangible good. I do have a lot of hope that at that point it's going to translate into a good amount of people purchasing the book. Minimum, like, I'm looking to maybe hopefully get 500 to 1,000 backers out of the 18,000 plus people I have on social media. It's not a high percentage of actual, when you look at it as comparison, it's, what, like 500 out of 18.5 is probably is like 2.5%. But when people who, a lot of you guys who do internet stuff know that in terms of click rate or the other stuff, 2.5% would actually be pretty high.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, that's approaching like targeted mail campaign click-through rates. Right.
Yeah, so I mean, that's my goal
in the junk mail industry. And so like if you super target your letter campaigns, you can get like 5% open rates. But yeah, like to get that off of social media, like that's pretty impressive.
You guys, believe it or not, I don't know how, but I target really, really carefully, and I use Instagram almost entirely. But not one of, I have about 15 landing pages for all different platforms, and the lowest one is like 11 or 12% conversion.
That's actually really fantastic. I mean, I in my day job business, I do marketing for my business, and I know enough from doing that to know what the conversion rate is on any kind of marketing that I'm paying for. So your targeting must be really spot on, and you're doing really great to have that kind of conversion rate. I'm actually would tell you that you should probably start coaching people and charging for it.
We'll see about that. I'm actually preparing some content right now for crypto investing advice, which I'd love to invite you all to. And I will think about the marketing as the next thing, but I need to have, one thing that I think that all of us here we have the benefit of is that this is not our only means of producing groceries for the family. Like, we're all doing this as a labor of love on the side, and to me it's critical for me that I remain in that scenario. I'm not saying that I don't want my comic to profit, but I want it to not matter, and that's why I focus primarily on the crypto first and the comic second, because I want it to not matter,
And is that because and just to ask the question, is that because when, by feeling like it doesn't matter to pay the bill, you don't feel like you're beholden to have to alter the content you want to create to be palatable to a mass audience compared to just the people who would appreciate what you're making?
I would say that it's even worse than you're suggesting, because even without any monetary pressure, I do feel a strong pressure for who is my audience and how do I reach them. And I don't want to feel that pressure at all. If I go too gross, is it going to alienate people? If the jokes are too edgy, am I going to alienate people? And I don't like that feeling of compromise at all. And if I feel that still, even if I don't give a damn if I ever get a dime, I can't even imagine how much my art would be ruined if I needed it to be a profitable venture to continue doing it.
No, it's true. And I think also there's one other lesson with this as well, because I know I do write my own web business, and this year finally it's taken off. But the thing is I was working full time and then also doing the business part time for about 7 years before that point. And it's just, there's a lot of stuff you have to figure out and develop over time. And this is right? In my case, I'm thinking from when I started, that's everything from like, developing the sales pipeline to developing like how to handle customers when they come in, that sort of thing. Like that's on the business side. And I can imagine for the creative side, right, it's not free to hire out all the components that you are not the expert in. And so you're right, like you have to continually maintain that output until you get all those pieces lined up, and then you get the kind of growth where it finally pays for itself.
Yeah,
And that's true. Like you cannot start the comic assuming it's going to take off very quickly at the beginning, because it sometimes it takes time to learn all those pieces.
that's another risk that I hadn't even mentioned that you're bringing up, which is how shitty is my comic right now compared to how it might be in 3 months of me ruminating on the same content, right? So I'm working on the first issue. I think I ended up calling the first issue 0 to give it away. And now I'm thinking issue 1 is the next issue, the first paid issue. And the more that I look at it, the more that I'm like, this really ought to be part of issue 0 and free. And I'm still finding my voice. And I don't know that that's everybody's problem. There's probably other people maybe listening to this podcast that have been making comics for 15 years, and you're not the people that I'm talking to. But as for me, myself, it's really the first time that I've started to get serious about writing anything or publishing anything. And I think a lot of it's going to end up being part of the free inaugural graphic novel. And I'm still finding my voice. I want the comic to be very violent. I have an artist who's a very Disney type artist, which has turned out to be amazing in a lot of ways that I can't even describe, but I still want the overall feeling of the comic to be fright, desperation, those kind of things. It's not necessarily his natural language. And I'm not sure where I'm going to end up when I balance it all appropriately. And I
I
hope.
have to say there were some great pages in that artwork, though, especially the one with like Jericho's being confronted by all those forest creatures, and he's got the sickle, like cutting that one's head off. That one,
Yeah,
I think,
the
definitely
artist
hit what
is
you were going for.
the artist is absolutely excellent, and I don't mean to suggest otherwise at all. But he also has this kind of inborn hopeful quality, like this. He's really good at light, the way that he uses light, especially the way the light falls on the objects and the people. And there's just this like irrepressible hopefulness in something in his art, and in a way that's the opposite of the world that I'm talking about. Like I'm describing a world in which there is no hope anymore. And that ship sailed a long time ago. And now we have to figure out how to survive, right?
And how to like, and then in this case, on the production side, like trying to build that like common vision,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
So have him rent In the Mouth of Madness and watch it about 3 times, followed by what would be a good one? Event Horizon, and be like, this is more like that and a little less Disney.
But you know what the thing is that I like the Disney aspect, especially with Rex the goat, for example. And it's
Oh, the
something
goat
that,
has such character. I love the little goat.
oh yeah,
yeah, for me it's becoming a fundamentally critical element of the comic, and he brought that. That's 100% him. Because this started as a comic, as a video game project, and the 3D art that I have is even darker and more disgusting. And that was really the direction that I was going. And after I saw some of his interpretations, though, I was like, maybe I'm wrong. Like, this is crazy. This is cute and good, and I like it. So I really want some kind of synthesis of the two things, but we haven't really found it exactly yet, and that's why I never did my Kickstarter.
I mean, one of the joys I've had in creating the little Chad comic, and people, I'm open about this. I don't draw it myself. I create the characters, then come up with like the design concepts, but I work with an artist to have it produced. Is sometimes when I lay out what my vision for a character is, and I get that first design draft back and it's a little different than I expected. And most of the time it's actually better, kind of with some of the choices the artist has made compared to where I would have thought it was supposed to go. that I think letting, being collaborative with the artist, and then still choosing what, and moving it back to where I wanted it to go from a pure like values and for the comic strip standpoint, has produced some really great content. So I think one thing that's interesting is, because I'm not generally in my previous employment and current jobs and things, been in a creative sphere, so to speak. The nature of letting your creations evolve organically while you're still trying to get where you want to go is really kind of a fun experience that I did not expect, from when I started it. And it's something that I think kind of mirrors what you're talking about, where you thought you were going one way, and as you're actually producing it, you're starting to kind of alter the path that you thought you would go based on the input you're getting, and maybe you're still a little unsure because it's different than where you thought, but it's in some ways it's better, but you still want to maintain kind of the integrity of what you wanted as a creation. And because and it's silly to say that in a little kids comic strip I've kind of had a similar experience, but it is something I think anybody, unless you're like Joey's doing, where he's learning to draw himself so he can do it himself completely, that's going to be a give and take that as a creator, you're going to have to deal with. Because if you're writing a comic book, if that's the kind of project you're working on and you're not the artist who can draw it, you're going to have to realize that the artist you work with is going to have some input in how things turn out that you didn't expect.
Yeah, you're so exactly on target that it's hard for me to say better than that. But just now, what you were talking about, the give and take with the artist, um, that's exactly what I went through. But I was just reading quotes from Ari Aster a couple days ago, and you made me think of something that he said, and I'm trying to find it right now. For those of you that don't know, Ari Aster is a hot shit new horror movie director. He's the guy that did Midsummer and Hereditary, and I just saw a quote of his about the filmmaking process that is so uh, exactly what you're saying. I mean, I need to find it and say it to validate our experience as, garage comic artists or whatever we are. I'm still looking for it.
No, absolutely. And it makes you wonder. At some point we should do an episode on just like the different things we've each learned on our creative projects, because we talked about, yeah, like improving and adjusting over time. I'm thinking about like the writing I've done, and man, like the stuff I did at the beginning of this year was just absolutely awful, but it was like the crude material that, right, we refined over the course of the year to like start to get some decent content at this point now. And there is something also to just running through that process until you start to get something good. And then once you're at that point, right, just like we can see with some of the guys who are out there succeeding now, right, then you can start delivering it consistently. And yeah, I mean, that is the process for creating Ascendant art.
Yeah, so I don't know how you guys feel about Ari Aster, but he's one of my favorite directors now, easily, of the last decade. And I found the quote, and he says, "Making films for me is just like this horribly prolonged grieving process of having to make compromises. Sometimes they're small, sometimes they're huge."
Yeah, but that is true though, because anytime that you work with somebody, creating that shared understanding is a part of it.
Yeah,
And
can you imagine a film too? There's like 100 people involved in a small film.
yeah, exactly. And I think this is, again, when we talk about, right, like different like places for art education or art schools, right, you hear plenty of other things, because like I follow stuff about storytelling. You hear a lot of things about storytelling. You hear about, right, you go to art, you learn how to draw that basket of fruit. um but I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about like shared vision and working through compromises. But you are right, like even like when I've done thumbnailing with one of the friends of our group, or when I started getting character art done with various artists, I think it was a similar kind of thing to go through, that I actually had to like change my main character, and it was mainly on the basis of there were just certain things I wanted that artists had a lot of trouble with. And then I started to realize, like, okay, can I adjust the story to tell the same story but make him easier to draw? So no, I mean, it's an important process.
For sure. And I don't mean to downplay the input of other people because it's critical. So even though my current artist, who's an amazing fucking artist, is taking things in a bit of a lighter and more hopeful direction than I expected, he's already added so much to the project, and I'm trying to remain open to where it will go in that with his influence because I trust him and he's excellent and he's contributing a lot.
It sounds like you might need him. Your story almost sounds a little too hopeless without his little injection of the tiniest little bit of hope.
Yeah, I think it
That's right,
could
lifted
very
up,
easily be. Yeah.
But I'm an optimist, so
Yeah.
There you go. But yeah, we'll definitely have to dive into this some more in a future episode. But
Have you guys heard of Hubert Selby Jr.?
I have not.
He's a novelist, an American East Coast novelist, but one of the most famous things that he ever wrote was called Requiem for a Dream.
I've seen that movie. If that's what.
That is.
Oh, that's depressing. So
Yeah. That's one of my favorite.
Darren Aronofsky doing that one. That was, it's funny. It's that movie almost got him Batman Year One, which would have been a really interesting choice for a director, but then it evolved into Batman Begins and was not him. So
He did get to marry Rachel Weisz at some point as a result of this.
yeah, that's why
So-
she was in The Fountainhead
Yep.
or The Fountain. The
I
Fountain.
mean, almost
Not the Fountainhead.
anything you can think of is worth that exchange.
It's yeah, I mean that movie was really bad, The Fountain. I did a review for it for joeblow.com when I was writing for them for a while. And because I used to run a section for them about like comic books that were being adapted into movies. And I was like, this is gonna be terrible. It's just not filmable as it's written. So, and it was like Darren Aronofsky wrote that comic book, and it was basically like the visual script for his movie. And I was just like, this is not going to make sense. And it's going to be, and when I finally saw the movie, I was like, wow,
Yep.
I nailed that review. Good for me.
Because again, sometimes, sometimes the story in your head, it'll make sense in both mediums, but yeah, certain stories just do not fit in every medium.
Yeah.
Because I know, and I'm curious what your reason was for that one, Vinny, but I know also in the case of comics especially, there is this ability to add external voices, thought bubbles, and these sort of things so that you can add in information that is not in the picture with the characters, right? Or especially like you can see the characters' thoughts side by side with whatever's going on in the panel. And I know, yeah, those sort of things just do not translate from comics to movies very well.
Yeah, I mean, there's something in movies that I call basically it's no collaboration is the problem. Like when a filmmaker gets a little bit too much control, and I would say that as an example, the Wachowski sisters now had that on Matrix Revolutions and Matrix Reloaded, where their success gave them too much carte blanche, and they didn't like sometimes having restrictions or collaborative partners who have a little bit of control can actually make you more creative and good about what you're doing. And sometimes when you get too much of freedom and no one questioning you, it can go the other direction. George Lucas, like when he did the prequels, when he did Phantom Menace, I think if he had still the people who had helped him on the original trilogy to kind of rein in some of his instincts to make them a little more story driven, or to help with actors' performances, would have gotten a better movie as an end result. Because I think the general stories on the prequels was a good story beat. It was executed because it ran his way with no collaboration. So having this kind of threads back to what we're kind of talking about, which is I think sometimes a creator can be very benefited by having a collaborator that challenges their preconceived notions and makes them think things through, not to change what they want, but to maybe think it can be executed a little better and differently. And so sometimes you also go the other direction, like John Carpenter, where after his experience making movies in the Hollywood system, specifically Big Trouble in Little China, which I think came out great. but was not, the studio gave him headaches for making it, and it didn't make as much money as he wanted. He said F that all, and he just went to making micro budget movies that he had full control over. And that's where we get They Live, which is probably more of a classic even than Big Trouble in Little China.
I was
And
gonna
I
say
really
that
like
is a
Big Trouble
classic,
in Little
dude.
China.
I like them both.
Believe it or not, I still never saw They Live, and I'm the biggest fanboy ever for The Thing, and I still never saw They Live.
I feel like They Live would fit your mindset so perfectly that you should just watch it and fall in love. 'Cause
Well,
Absolutely, dude.
That's part of the thing, is that I already know what to expect from the movie. Part of the reason that I haven't watched, but yeah, it absolutely does, from what I know.
Well, there's some homework assignment before the next podcast. Okay, so I'm work on my stuff. You'll watch They Live, and then Michael, you can. I don't know what you've still got on yours. A lot of comic books that I've told you about over the last few months.
I was gonna say, dude, that list just keeps getting longer. But yeah, I've got a few that I've read through. I may have to ask you some questions about a few of these for sure. But
well, let's treat it like the Eternals review. Remember, it's like your homework assignment. If you want to keep up with everyone, you're just going to have to do it before you can move on.
Yeah, and it's also the case too that like you can't be a creator until you're a fan. You've got to spend time in the medium.
I think that's an awesome note to kind of end on, because it circles right back to where we were with those terribly misleading Eternals reviews, but in a positive way.
Exactly. So in that case, yeah, let's go ahead and wrap it up here. And guys, as always, thanks for the discussion and for another step on our search and on our journey. Talk to you next time.
Talk to you later.
Bye.